speaking about commemorations taking place tomorrow. Let's stay with this theme. Advocate Dali Mpofu says the Marikana massacre is one of the country's darkest moments. Mpofu is was representing some of the families of the victims and the survivors of the tragedy. He joins me now from Johannesburg for more on this conversation. Advocate, thank you so much for your time this evening. I do remember it was even in 2020 where you were speaking about how we keep commemorating this day, and yet it appears as though we are lacking in humanity and we are lacking in Ubuntu, even in the way in which we are responding to the events that are leading up to Marikana as well as what happened in Marikana. Where is the humanity in this, and where should we find the humanity in this?
Well, thank you. Good evening, Faith. The humanity is sadly lacking in this matter at so many levels. You know, I was saying to somebody this afternoon that there's actually another massacre upon a massacre. There's the massacre itself. There is the massacre of the conditions that Silinelo is explaining, which have actually worsened in that area, which, by the way, is what caused the strife and the wage demands in the first place. And then, of course, the third massacre, if you like, is the lack of humanity that you refer to, particularly in respect of the compensation, retribution, lack of apology, and all sorts of lackadaisical approach that you find from the side of the perpetrators, broadly speaking, whether they are the government, the police, the mine itself, but anybody who was on that side of the divide seems to be taking this thing lightly, and there's no sense of urgency. Hence, 9 years later, there are still a number of people whose compensation has not been paid, which includes some of the most seriously injured people.
Yeah, and speaking about perpetrators there, can we get clarity on exactly how many people have actually accounted for this? I mean, there were reports that were suggesting about 9 police officials have actually been arrested for events that were leading up to the Marikana massacre. But is there any clarity regarding how many officials or police officers were arrested for the events on the 16th of August and what has happened till then? Do we know who has actually accounted for this?
No, absolutely not. Yeah, and so far as there has been one prosecution, as you correctly point out, it relates to events that happened on the 13th, which is part of the build-up. But for the events of the 16th of August itself, which is the actual massacre, nobody has been brought to book. And there are different levels of what we call perpetrators. There are, of course, the people, the shooters, the ones who pulled the trigger that you see on your footage. Then there are the police bosses who determined that that day, the 16th of August, would be what they called D-Day. And there's even audio evidence of them planning how the day was going to be carried out. And then there's a third layer of perpetrators who are the masterminds, the politicians, the mine bosses who basically instigated and aided and abetted the murder of the people on that day. None of those people have been brought to book, sadly.
Then when we're speaking about accountability, Advocate, how then do we start calling for this accountability? How does it happen that it's 9 years later and a lot of the family members and the victims have not received the compensation? A lot of the masterminds, the perpetrators, whether it's the state, whether it's the SAPS and such, have not accounted for that, and maybe except for the Northwest Police Commissioner and the like. And yet we still can go on as a country where business is as usual. It almost appears as though we've got selective amnesia, doesn't it?
No, it does. And it brings, to our own backyard, the issue of Black Lives Matter, I think never be illustrated than in this case, that actually in this country, which is supposed to be a black-led country, Black lives clearly do not matter. I have no doubt that if those victims had not been poor black people, by now some kind of justice would have been meted out. And that's what makes it even more unpalatable, because Faith, nobody can really say that if this government took this issue of Marikana seriously, that at least once they would have said, a Minister of Finance or Minister of Justice or the President would have said, look, this year in our budget, we're going to make sure that at least the primary victims are compensated. And it would have been done, within a matter of weeks, months, or even a year, if you want to be generous, but not 9 years. I mean, this clearly is people are dying now. Some of the victims have actually died. Some are sitting with serious injuries without the ability to work and without any compensation at all. With the pandemic now, we might lose more people. So it's just a situation that cannot be explained. And maybe the public should start demanding answers.
Yeah, I mean, speaking about demanding answers, I do believe that it was about in 2018, following the events of Marikana, where we saw Police Minister Bheki Cele select a panel of experts, so to say, to make recommendations around policing in this country. I think about 136 or so recommendations were put forward. Is it enough, in your opinion?
No, certainly, even those recommendations have not been acted on. The only group of people who have been compensated are those who were unlawfully arrested. But the people, as I say, who have been injured and those who have lost their lives have not been fully compensated in the case of the widows, or not compensated at all in the case of those who are seriously injured. And that is a tragedy on its own. As far as the prosecutions are concerned, we have a prosecution of the victims, so to speak, which has been going on for 9 years. In that case, these people have been going to court at least 3 or 4 times a year. That case itself has not had any progress. So that's further trauma that is put on their side. And yet, as I said earlier, on the side of the perpetrators, there seems to be no will, no political will. It was not just the police minister. The president made promises, in front of the international community in 2018 that he would go to Marikana and apologize. He has not done so. It's now almost 3 years later. And so clearly there's no sense that this is a priority or that these victims should be taken seriously and be given at least the humanity. They always say to us, we know that our loved ones will not come back, but at the very least we would like an acknowledgement that something seriously wrong was done, but that is not forthcoming.
Advocate Dali Mpofu, we'll leave it there for this evening. Thank you so much for your time. I guess the question now is, have we failed the families and the victims of Marikana? Well, as we commemorate the 9th year of the Marikana massacre, you be the judge of that. On to this story.